Hello and welcome to Bulimia Sucks. I'm your host, Kate Hudson Hall, and thank you so much for listening. Now, this is a platform for people to share relatable and uplifting and inspiring conversations based on anorexia, bulimia, and all the many different other eating disorders. And episodes include talking with people who are struggling now with an eating disorder, sharing their personal stories, their difficult journeys, and their steps taken into their recovery. And then also to people who have overcome their eating disorder, which is incredible. And then plus with people who are professionals who work with people with eating disorders who may have had their own struggle with an eating disorder. So it's a nice wide variety of different people. So as a therapist, I've created a free Bulimia Sucks course to get you started on your recovery pathway. So if you would like to find out more about this, if you go to my website, katehudson-hall.com. And on the homepage, there is a sign-up form, which will take you straight in there. So check that out. And the other thing that I've been doing is I have been finishing off my book on helping people with anxiety. And I've decided to call it Anxiety Hacks because there's lots of different techniques and tools and helpful different pathways to be able to help you begin to break your anxiety patterns and be able to, tools, techniques to be able to calm you in that moment. So I'm very excited about this. And I've just had the book back from the editor and I'm not so excited now. I'm not enjoying the editing. Let's get down to it. I'm not really enjoying it, but I will persevere. Now, our fantastic guest today is Stefanie Bonastia. Stefanie is a binge eating recovery and body image coach, specializing in helping women overcome food and body image issues. She holds a degree in human development psychology and occupational therapy with a certification in integrative health coaching and intuitive eating counseling. So after struggling with multiple eating disorders for 25 years, Stefanie experienced her own recovery with the help of a coach and plenty of self-exploration. She considers her boots on the ground experience of recovery her most teachable asset. Yes, she's got all the experience to share with us today. So Stefanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about your book. I have anxiety in my background as well, so I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I think so many of us do. And I've had it so many times throughout my life. Yes, it's yes, especially after what we went through with COVID. It's a lot of people have it now, don't they?
Yes, I hear about it all the time, and it interweaves with eating disorders and body image. They're friends.
Yes, yeah, they kind of hook onto each other. Unfortunately, yes. They're not easy to break free from. Yeah. So Stefanie, so let's start with your story with your eating disorder. So, oh gosh, so 25 years. So tell us about that.
Right. So my eating disorder began, as many people's did, in adolescence. I was a thin child, but not, as thin as some of my peers, I suppose. So I'd always had this awareness of my body being maybe slightly bigger than my friends. And I'd had some insecurities around that. And I dabbled in diets as far as these things are introduced to us as girls. But when I was around 15 years old, I took dieting kind of to the next level, and it quickly devolved into anorexic patterns. And I lost a lot of weight and of course got a lot of reinforcement around that. People didn't know obviously what I was doing. I was just hearing the, kudos and wow, you look so great. And in fact, I even had somebody comment to me that I looked anorexic and it was awesome. I remember this, friend telling me this and feeling really high on that.
Yeah.
So that went on for a few years until this one day, and I talk about this because I still remember it so vividly, where I binged. I had this binge come out of nowhere on my mom's pasta salad that she had made, and I ate the entire thing. And I didn't know what this was, and I like couldn't believe I'd done it, and I was so angry and so upset, and I just sort of sat with that and kind of, all right, tomorrow I'll get back on. And this began this pattern of binge and restrict, which went on for quite some time until I became, I mean, just as you, and I'm sure your listeners know, this becomes so, I can't even find the right word for it. Like, just the distress around this was intolerable. And so I started looking at means of compensating for these binges that were happening more and more frequently with laxative abuse and purging and over exercising and restricting. And that went on for years and years. And I went to college this way. My college years were really tainted with this these secretive episodes, which were really going on, not even episodes, they were just consistently happening. Into my 20s, and I got married with this going on. At points in my life, it was just binge eating without the restrictive or compensatory behaviors, but always returning to making up for it with bulimic behaviors. And then I started having children, and still it wasn't enough to sort of knock me. I always assumed that once I had kids, this would sort of go away because I had this responsibility to not, to sort of get it together. But of course that didn't happen. And I ventured into orthorexia at that time, trying to make my kids becoming, really healthy. I became really obsessed with that. And I also thought it would help me. So I became very obsessed with eating clean and eating in these certain ways and eating only during certain times. And this only fueled my binges, which then fueled my bulimia. And so I was almost 40 years old when I realized that I had really been just doing the same thing over and over again since I was 15, and just taking different forms and having a different way of approaching it, or trying fasting, or trying low carb, or trying all these different ways of getting my binges and restrictions to stop, or my binges to stop, really, not my restrictions. And so I read a book by Caroline Dooner called The Fuck It Diet. I'm not sure if we're allowed to curse.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Okay. I read this book, and it was the first that I had heard of why this goes on and why the body is moving towards the binges and how restriction is fueling that pattern. And I don't know why. I suppose it was just the time, the perfect storm of factors in my life, that at the time I was ready to hear that message.
Yeah.
But
if you were to know, Stefanie, why at that particular time you heard that message, for what reason, why do you think at that time?
I get asked that question a lot. I think part of it was my age. And I think that as as I said, I was approaching 40, and there was this feeling of, it's going to be another decade of doing this unless I do something completely differently. I'm an occupational therapist by training. And so I had learned a lot about the nervous system as far as working with kids and working with anxiety and working with the way that our body feels safe and unsafe and how to regulate that. And I started to think it started to make sense to me that my physiology was feeling threatened by my restriction, and that it was seeking some kind of soothing through food, because food is so sensory. So this sort of my knowledge outside of eating disorder, what I had seen as outside of eating disorder recovery, started to make sense in new ways to me. So I was putting puzzle pieces together that I suppose I'd been collecting along my way. They all sort of started to fit into this whole that I could finally see. And I just had this inner sense of knowing that if I didn't try something differently, that I would just continue this path. And so I wasn't full on. I said to myself, like, I'm going to give myself a year to try this approach of not restricting anymore and really understanding what that meant, and gaining weight, because up until this point, my body image had been horrific.
Right.
And I said, I'm going to give myself a year. What do I have to lose at this point? I've been giving away all these years to begin with. Yeah. And if at the end of this year, I don't feel any better, or this doesn't work for me, or it's another, then I go back to the ways that I had been doing it and keep plugging on. And as it turned out, and much to my, disbelief, I was able to stop throughout the course of that year, stop binging, stop.
So what did you actually do?
So where I
Stop
normally would
restricting.
have, I stopped restricting first. So up until that point, I had always said, I will stop restricting when I stop binging. And that had been like, of course, I'm not going to stop restricting. I have to make up for the binges. That was given. So in this approach, it was, I am going to, when I binge, I'm not going to follow it up the next day with plotting out how many calories I'm now allowed or exercising X, Y, and Z. I even stopped exercising during this year altogether because I knew that it was a slippery slope of compensatory behavior. Yeah. So it was a complete surrender of compensation in any way. And that was incredibly difficult. I remember.
Yeah, so how were you feeling then?
When it began or when
you decided that you were going to completely stop all of these old behaviors? Yeah.
Terrified.
Scary.
Yes, I knew that I would be gaining weight. And that was really what was terrifying about it. Yeah. It was like walking into the fire and knowing. But I think in the way that I was thinking was just that, all right, well, I'll expect to gain weight and just to have to wrap my head around that. That was the hardest part. And I cried a lot. And it was, my husband knew about this. So he was aware. And he, literally every night when we would go to sleep, I would say, I don't think I can do this anymore. This is ridiculous. How could I be eating all this food and not making up for tomorrow? It's just not right. And sort of, he would be a sounding board for me to get me through. I was like, okay, well, just one more day. I keep going one more day. Until I noticed that my binge urges were actually decreasing, which they never had.
Right.
I was 15. So something had started to work.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And so were you seeing a therapist at the time, or what other help, external help did you have?
I had always been seeing a therapist. So since I was 17, I had been seeing a therapist, and we had done a lot of self-exploration, and I'd had therapists that were trained in eating disorders, and I was seeing one at the time, but nothing ever worked for me as far as the behaviors of an eating disorder. So while things conceptually would make sense to me, or I would learn things about myself, I felt like I was growing as a person in a lot of ways through therapy, but nothing ever touched my behaviors. And so I did continue therapy through that time, but I wasn't there. I was more there for my anxiety and just other sources of, other things we go to therapy for, but I didn't expect it to cure me anymore. So I did hire at some point a body image coach, which I didn't even know existed. And there are very few actually out there, but I had found a body image coach on Instagram somehow. I had just started on Instagram at the time, and she had just been posting things that made a lot of sense to me as far as relating to one's body and our authenticity and our identity. And I started working with her, and I credit that work with being able to get through the recovery process because I was leaning on a lot of the concepts and tools that she was helping me. And even just having someone to talk to about that, who really understood what it was like to feel like you couldn't bear to be in your own skin. So that was a part of my recovery as well, which evolved into my own work as a body image coach now as I help people through both of these processes, because it's complex. It's not just a vanity issue. There's a lot underneath our body image that has to do with our sense of self and our place in this world and our connection and our feelings of abandonment and all these deeper sort of iceberg layers.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So if you had somebody that came to see you that had or was working through getting over their eating disorder in their recovery path, so what sort of steps would you take them through with regards to their body image?
So body image, we start talking about the original source of that shame. And if you've ever read The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, she talks about this in terms of splitting and our moment of splitting. So this point where, as children, we may or may not have a memory of it, but we were born being as a whole person. We don't necessarily even see ourselves as distinct from our body. And at some point, someone in school makes a comment or a parent tells us we need to go on a diet. There's this moment where we realize that our body isn't good enough, or there's something potentially wrong with it, or somebody is seeing something in our body that we were previously unaware of, that we didn't recognize as a problem, where we suddenly start to see it as a problem. And in this moment, we split from ourselves, really, as far as I see that I have a body and this is not good enough, therefore I am not good enough. And we then begin this war with ourselves. And so a lot of work begins at identifying these moments of splitting and where that's occurring, and then the trajectory of ourself as running away from that side of ourselves, potentially for the, to the present moment. So it's exploring these stories that we've made and the ways in which we have sort of offloaded our sense of autonomy and sense of self to other people and to diet culture and the messages that we're getting in the world about what is acceptable and how this is all making us feel unsafe, really. And so it's about establishing a safety again inside of your body and kind of putting the camera lens back on the experience of living so that we're looking out on life rather than feeling like we're always on the opposite side of the camera, being looked at and being objectified, and sort of dismantling this over time through working on how we are finding our identity and where we do feel a sense of autonomy and belonging and connection to the world outside of just our bodies.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated because everybody's different.
Yeah.
And so what else do you teach them and work through?
So a lot of the work focuses on authenticity. That's a big theme as far as, I think through eating disorders, a lot of times we can suppress who we are. There's a lot of my clients have people-pleasing tendencies and the loss of self in the pursuit of becoming what is good enough. And so in reaffirming our own hunger and our, not suppressing our actual human needs and not feeling like we need to take up less and less and less space, we sort of re-explore what it means to take up more space as ourselves and what that means. And I often hear that people have this a complex of being too much, and that they were taught maybe by their family of origin that they were too much and too dramatic and too emotional and too needy, and sort of reclaiming what it is that we actually do need. And perhaps it was we were not too much, but our needs just had a difficult time getting met. And so we needed more and more and more. And so it's looking at what are our needs, who are we really, and claiming that as a way of pursuing our own authentic self. So that's a big theme, as well as identity and who we feel we are outside of our body image and what makes us who we are and how we connect to other people. Connection is a big one. Feelings of loneliness, feelings of shame around our feelings of loneliness. So these weave in, and we do talk about actual more practical matters like shopping and being able to look at ourselves in a photograph and the food itself. These are obviously themes that we focus on as well, but they tend to lead back towards these more baseline layers of self and the way that we're relating to ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. And what about the mirrors?
And the mirrors. Yeah. The reflections, whether that's in a photograph or a mirror. I have this concept of, or an activity that we'll do. And of course, this is, depending on where we are, because I have some clients we can't get to this point for months, and others that would jump right in, but this concept of staying. So where our tendency is to look in the mirror and potentially feel like a disgust, or, if something's not right, we're disgusted, we turn away, we vow to do better. We sort of like self-abandon in a lot of these moments. And it's this concept of staying with that reflection and actually looking at it longer. And this dance of making that image tolerable and seeing more than what our like sort of initial judgment is trying to convince us of. And it's really hard. And I have clients where we work on this for a long time, that being able to stay with our reflected image. Yeah. And what we find is that the longer we're able to tolerate, or when we can tolerate being able to look ourselves in the mirror and see ourselves reflected and stay with ourselves, there's this spillover of being able to stay with ourselves in life in general, and to be able to hold our own hands through difficult emotions and through times where we'd rather run and hide. It's becoming your own ally in a way through this mirror work. I think when we stay with our bodies, we learn to stay with who we are, which I think is a bit of an art form nowadays.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. Some excellent help and food for thought, so to speak. And so if you could turn back to when you were a teenager, what advice would you give yourself now, with everything that you know? What would you say to yourself back then?
I don't know that I could have heard it at that time. So I don't know that I was
So that's
ready.
a good point. Yeah.
But I do think that at that time I was so lost. I had a lot going on as far as knowing who I was and feeling calm. I think I had a lot of dysregulation at that time in my central nervous system, really, which I've come to really appreciate now, as far as how our nervous system states can impact how we feel safe, whether that's physically safe or mentally or emotionally. And I wasn't feeling emotionally safe at that time, and there was such a need to be calmed. And I think that I was using food either via restriction or binging to calm myself down or to ground myself in some kind of moment. And I wish that version of me had been able to understand the way that my system state wasn't my fault and that it wasn't something I could think my way out of. I wish it had some tools and resources. I wish it had social media in a way at that time. I mean, for certain reasons, I don't. But there is definitely a lot more information available as far as being able to understand how we work and to gather tools around calming oneself down and being able to regulate a system so that I could think more clearly. Because I think I was acting a lot on impulse and just like primal instinct at that time, because I was just always in a fear state.
So it's trying to keep yourself calm and safe by this behavior. Yes.
So it made sense. And I wish I could have understood what I was really trying to do. Because at the time, I think it's pretty normal that, it feels very much like it's just about my body. That's all I really thought it was, but it was about so much more.
Yeah. So that's good to hear that. Yeah. So what would you say to somebody that is thinking about stepping on their recovery path, but they're unsure about doing that? What would you say to them?
I really believe in the like marination. So I think that there is a point of readiness with recovery, and that doesn't mean that we feel 100% ready. I think there's always a bit of fear and trepidation around it, but that there is a point you get to where we really feel ready to overcome the eating disorder, not to escape ourselves. And so gathering information as far as podcasts, books, social media accounts, and all the plethora of things available to us now that talk about this, and sort of letting these things soak in and giving yourself enough space and time to see what's sticking, what's really resonating, who are you connecting with as far as, the different voices out there that speak about this, and then pursuing that. I think that there is a part of us that knows and moves towards what is true and what is going to resonate most deeply with us. And so giving ourselves the time and space to be able to explore that and seeing what lands, and then pursuing that when it feels time.
Yeah. Finding out what you're drawn to, what you think, what you think would work for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And trying it out. Maybe it will, and that will be perfect. And then, but if it doesn't, then that's fine. You just move on and then have another look.
Exactly. Yeah. I think everybody, because nobody's journey is the same. So there's going to be different people who have different messages that are going to be right for you. And it's finding that. I certainly went through a lot of different approaches before landing here. And I probably needed them all to get here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, it's finding a therapist that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I interviewed a lot of therapists. I had it's like dating. It's like you have to find just the right one. a lot of no thank yous, but yeah, it's a team effort in many ways. I think having that support is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's finding that right therapist and interviewing them, going and meeting them and seeing whether you really feel comfortable enough to open up with them.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you don't, that's fine. Just gonna move on
Yes.
to the next one.
Yes.
So Stefanie, tell us, so what are you doing now?
So now I am coaching full time around these topics. So I am a binge recovery. I specialize in binge eating recovery and body image. And I also work a lot with nervous system regulation. So I have a course on binge eating recovery. I have an upcoming body image workshop. Yes. So this is going over practical tools to be able to use simple practical tools and the repetition of the use of these tools in order to sort of come from a beginner to moderate, I would say, or level of body image healing. And I have a podcast, and
what's the name of the podcast?
Podcast is called Life After Diets. So this is for anyone on anywhere on the spectrum, whether eating disorder, diagnosed eating disorder or disordered eating, as many of us have, undiagnosed.
Absolutely.
But anyone who's looking to sort of leave the dieting world and sort of venture into this recovery mindset.
And it's on all the main platforms.
Yes.
Ooh, fabulous. And so with regards to the two courses, so how do they work? So the binge eating and the body recovery.
My binge eating course is a 12-week course that has weekly modules that come out every week, which are pre-recorded by me. And then I'm also hosting weekly calls to the group. So these are recorded if you can't make the live calls. And there's a Facebook group, and there's an option to work with me one-to-one in addition to that, if the support is needs to be more immersive. I do one-to-one coaching as well. And with the body image course, it's an 8-week course that is live weekly, but is also recorded to accommodate all the different time zones, because now we can reach everybody. So that will be in June and July this year. And you can find all that information on my website. And
what was your website? We'll leave all the links below.
Yeah, my website is iamstephaniemichelle.com.
Right. And what is your Instagram handle?
I am Stefanie Michelle.
Should I ask any other questions there? Oh, fantastic. So, okay, so that's great. And well, Stefanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was nice to meet you, talk to you today.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing to have you on, and some real helpful, insightful information. And now people can come and find you and reach out for help from you.
Awesome.
So that is fantastic. So, well, thank you to everybody for listening, and make sure you come and join our Facebook group, Bulimia Sucks, if you haven't already, where it's great to connect with like-minded people and chat about their ups and downs. And thank you for listening. And I look forward to speaking with you in the next episode.